Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. Thanks to your generous support, and particularly Marcus Briggs, one of my patrons, he had a question for me about extremely high attributes, particularly the mental attributes, and what they mean for a player character. So I wanted to talk about this and interrupt the continual uploading of a couple of monster ecology vids every week, the regular Planescape campaign recordings and such, to bring you a D&D ramble on the topic requested by my patron, concerning specifically attributes, what they actually mean in the D&D world, not just what you can do by the numbers on paper, but what the extremely high scores actually mean. Strength is a no-brainer. It's all clearly defined by damage bonus and physical limits, precise limits on how much a character can lift, how high or far they can jump, and so on. So should a character have a bonus to their movement speed if they have a really high strength to weight ratio? I will leave that debate to the forums and message boards, but it's certainly something to consider. Dexterity is a measure of the speed of nerve conductivity, how fast the body can react. This is not just important for leaping out of the way of danger, it also translates into more minute corrections to movement per fraction of a second, meaning the overall grace and accuracy of the body is reliant on the speed that signals can pass from the brain through the nervous system and cause the muscles to react. More muscle reactions per second mean more smooth and graceful behavior, more precise and dexterous activity. Constitution is a measure of cardiovascular robustness and pain tolerance. General fitness. It's not just how much strain, how fast the heart can pump, and how much air the character can process into the bloodstream. It's also about how much the character can push the threshold into the red line of actual physical harm. Constitution and strength are much more variable in reality. A person has different levels of fitness over their life dependent on their lifestyle and activities. Adventurers are often individuals who hone their body to peak physical condition and regularly undergo extreme levels of duress just in order to survive. While this would normally take its toll in the long run with injuries to tendons and joints, not to mention nerve damage, aches and pains of all kinds, the characters live in a world with magical healing and extraordinary alchemicals. I mean, who knows what's inside an actual healing potion, but it would sell for millions on Earth. And usually such divine healing removes any scars and such, so an adventurer may very well end up being unusually healthy and vigorous in comparison to your average person. One could very well see healing potions as performance-enhancing drugs, which we conveniently ignore any implications of this sort of substance may have on the sort of long-term dependency and addiction of a character, but it's certainly something to think about. What is not so clear-cut is the mental attributes. So what is it so that's what we're here to talk about. But first, a note on 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and what bounded accuracy means. I talked about this long ago when the edition was still being playtested. I was very excited about it. Power creep is a term that refers to increases in amounts by level, and with the sort of inevitable drive to create more impressive weapons, armor, magic items, spells, and class abilities. As the edition acquires new sourcebooks, the rule of cool meant that this was something of a problem in earlier editions of the game, particularly in some abilities, items, and loopholes in the rules that allowed for some outlandish combinations that resulted in ridiculously high stats, bonuses, and devastating combined effects. Bounded accuracy in rules terms is the set of upper limits placed on ability scores, bonuses, armor class, and difficulty of tasks. The fact that these do not change according to the level of the player characters or monsters, and that, well, within reason, and that there are very few exceptions to these hard limits, means that there is effectively a built-in control on the basic physics of the game world. The secondary effect is that it is much easier to work out what the expected numbers should be, and the tertiary effect is that there is a much broader application of elements of the game world for all levels of gameplay. An adult Red Dragon can get taken down by a sufficient number of low-level town guards, because things generally always have a chance of winning a fight. Given time and luck, it is always a possibility, even if unlikely. 4th edition was a good example of power creep being dealt with in complicated ways that didn't actually fix the core problem. with creature types being divided up into versions of the same sorts of creatures, but designed around the tier of play they were supposed to be used in. This obviously played havoc with designing the game world lore that had to accommodate all of these radically different creatures existing in the same place. The rule system itself had a lot of good qualities, but the clear divide between tiers of play and redundancy of elements of the game world was clearly very broken. It was perfectly reasonable to ask where these super powerful monsters were when the low-level characters were venturing out on their first adventures, but the game itself just sort of threw up a smokescreen of artificial assumptions about gameplay, such as the idea that low-level characters would never travel to another dimensional plane of existence, would not have access to this or that. It worked mechanically, but it fell apart at high-level play, where there were so many abilities, items, and effects that one literally had to keep track of them with a stack of reference cards. Dungeons & Dragons had become a card game with dice and a side order of storytelling. Don't get me wrong, I played it from start to finish and loved that edition, but then I'm something of a D&D fanatic, so I realise my opinion is always going to be pretty biased. I will say that without a doubt, 4th edition has the best, well, it had the best online support, and it was far easier for brand new players to get started with the previous edition. And, well, it was just easier than the current edition to make a new character and get it into play as quickly as possible. That was the advantage of a very mechanical balanced system. It lended itself extremely well to computer programs. So we had encounter builders, we had character builders that were very good. 5th edition was just as much a radical redesign as 4th edition, really. But instead of applying systems to existing assumptions, it went back to bare bones, effectively stripped D&D down to its raw parts, spread it out on the workshop floor, picked up every part and said, is this required to actually run the game? And more importantly, they turned to the players and asked them these exact same questions. What spells are a must-have if you're talking about a wizard, and what they should be able to do? Can we streamline it and lump a lot of unnecessary parts into one thing instead? What were once progression trees of incremental feat selections, all with pre-existing requirements, became a specific body of abilities and skills around a theme, which was what all these parts were supposed to do in the first place. What was once a chore of updating the character sheet with every part of the desired result instead became a milestone decision which really defined a specific role and talent for that character. Backgrounds and origins, attitudes, associations, relationships, and ideals became a strong focus for character creation and meant that there were no cookie-cutter player characters anymore. No two fighters had to be alike, and there were tons of scope for modifying a character to suit the player's vision of who that individual is and where they came from. At the same time, there are no more assumptions about the rate at which a character is supposed to get magic items or where they can travel. There were a lot of revelations during the playtest period that shocked a lot of people and broke them out of a rut of assumptions. One of which was that higher levels of play beyond 10th level are much less common than most people thought. Also, a lot of the micromanagement of bonuses and penalties, individual skills and such could be greatly simplified, and it made not one jot of difference to the storytelling. In fact, it made it a hell of a lot less distracting, and you just grant advantage or disadvantage rather than break out the notepaper and track 100 different bonuses and penalties. Dungeons & Dragons is not supposed to be an exercise in accounting, unless it's a recounting of heroic deeds. So, there are limits on player character attributes for a reason. There are also limits on how difficult something can be. Thus, there is no need for an attribute beyond 20, and thus, there is no necessity for magic items to make things possible. 5th edition can work with no magic items at all. Of course, some creatures become way more difficult to deal with, but never impossibly so. Difficulty class 30 represents a nearly impossible task, such as trying to break a solid masonry wall a foot thick, or successfully punch a god in the face. The maximum ability modifier is +5, and the maximum proficiency bonus is +6, so no bonus can ever be higher than 11. This is because we're dealing with the physical properties of using a 20-sided dice to represent every possibility and probability. There are limits to this, thus, there are hard limits built into the core mechanics of the game. It really is as simple as that. If we were using percentile dice, we could probably be a lot broader. So we know that there are upper limits, but what does this really mean for the mental attributes, and what do these attributes actually represent? Intelligence attribute represents memory, both accumulated knowledge and the ability to recall it with clarity, but it also represents the internal measure of how much working memory, of raw processing power, the brain of that individual has. For example, a high intelligence in a character is not that has not spent their life training and learning information through books and scrolls will still have a remarkable ability to recall conversations, people they've met, items they have seen, and just generally recount what they have witnessed in their life with more accuracy than other people. They may give the impression that they never forget things and that they're very good at learning new details, so a rough and impoverished youth might rise to power in a thieves' guild simply because they never forget a face, know where to find just about anything in the city, and have a knack for making maps that other thieves can use to plan burglaries because the maps are very accurate. With wizards, they also have an abundance of processing power in their brain that they actively train themselves to use to its fullest potential. To give an example, look at a string of random numbers, perhaps generate them with dice, write them down in a row. Now try to remember as many as you can with a couple of moments to look at them. Go to another room and write down as many as you can recall in the correct order. A person with a very high intelligence attribute can write down more numbers than anyone else. Try to picture in clear detail and motion a set of different coloured balls, like juggling balls, moving as though they are being juggled. Start with 2. Now add more until you admit to yourself that you can't keep them all pictured in your mind's eye at the same time. This mental imaging capacity is also an aspect of intelligence, and when wizards memorize spells at the start of the day, they are not juggling balls, but complex arcane formulas being repeated and visualized constantly all day until they are completed and cast. And they do that while having conversations with other people, getting into combat, and all the other stuff that adventurers are expected to do. This is why intelligence is extremely important to wizards. Intellect and problem solving is based on previous experience. If a situation is similar to something remembered, then problems can be solved based on the character's intelligence score. Wisdom is the ability to observe and make quick associations. It also represents the capacity to be in tune with both the character's own internal state of being, as well as everything going on around them. A character with a very high wisdom attribute is remarkably perceptive, not just in noticing things that they've changed since the last time they looked at that particular thing. The spot the difference puzzles, where two images where there are a certain number of subtle differences between them. A high wisdom character, they're amazing at these. They consider them to be child's play. They also can tell the difference when something is different about themselves, just as when they're at risk from a magical or psychic compulsion, an enchantment that acts against the character's own will. So they're very aware. They're constantly looking at their own train of thought while it's going on. They're examining all the aspects of their environment. Much like the extra mental processing speed for memory that the high intelligence character has, high wisdom represents a wider area that the character can focus on, an increased focus, an increased capacity to keep track of the here and now, the current moment to moment passage of time, the motion and flow of people, objects, and their own thoughts. When you pair high wisdom and high intelligence, you get a character like Sherlock Holmes, who not only notices minute details in their surroundings, but they also have a stunning ability to associate knowledge about all sorts of things that they remembered, to build a much greater understanding of the situation, and to figure out what has transpired and what may be the most likely next course of actions and events. A fine sense of cause and effect, as well as noticing very subtle changes in their surroundings, give high wisdom characters an almost precognitive ability to not just tell truth from lies, false from real, but also get a pretty good idea of what is most likely to happen next and react accordingly. When dealing with a character that has a very high wisdom attribute, there is often no need to roll for perception. They just notice things, and other player characters will come to rely on them to do so. So as the DM, you turn to that character, you realize that this character's got a high wisdom, and you just turn and tell them that they can explain it to the party. So this can result in other characters essentially following the lead of the very perceptive character. And it may also result in the high wisdom character just being lumped with a leadership responsibility. Unless they actively defer to someone else, this is just a natural reaction. Intelligent creatures place so much emphasis on awareness of their environment that the person who is best at it usually ends up leading the way. and those who lead also choose the direction of the group. This can result in a character with a high wisdom but dismal charisma doing all the talking for the group, even though they probably shouldn't. I see this happen in my games for sure. Charisma is a tricky attribute because it can mean both trust and an intimidation, but the thing to realize is they are both about trust and belief. Why are you intimidated? Because you believe you may be harmed. Characters with a high charisma attribute have a remarkable talent for observing and learning body language, communication, and to some extent, empathy. This is less the touchy-feely empathy of seeing someone stub their toe and wincing in reaction to it, as the keen understanding of what they are feeling causes the character's own body to recoil from it. No, this is more of an analytical empathy, so the character is so aware of and practiced in observing and understanding even very subtle gestures, postures, sounds, methods of dress, mannerisms, and so forth, that they can see a shift in another person's mood as clearly as if they've just stubbed their toe. They can also, they know how to emulate all of these tiny details to appear absolutely genuine, down to mimicking gestures and expressions that for most people are completely unconscious reactions, mannerisms, and tics. To the average person, these minute details may as well be concealed behind a veil, and they will miss all the signals other people display to warn the low wisdom character that they're crossing a line, lost credibility, or just pissed the other person off. So crass, tactless, boorish behaviour is a symptom of a low charisma. Characters with both high charisma and high wisdom will not only know how another person is feeling, but they also probably know or figure out why that person is feeling that way, and if need be, how best to manipulate the other person to change their perspective of them. High charisma characters are extremely confident and convincing. They tend to know just what to say, as if they are stealing the words right out of the mouths of those around them. They can also be totally convincing when they threaten other people, tell lies, and spread doubt or disinformation. High charisma characters often take leadership positions because they represent themselves so well with such confidence and authority that others just assume that they know what they're doing. If you have any thoughts on this topic, particularly real examples from your games where a character had two very high charisma, wisdom, intelligence, or some combination of them all, I would love to discuss this further with you, and if you have any more questions on very high or low attributes, please let me know down below, and feel free everyone to answer other people's questions that I miss. Like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and videos just like this, and all the full scripts for these videos. Buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride. Also I'm collecting ideas for merchandise as well, so more merchandise is in the works for 2019. And check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again soon.